with trembling hands. What he did next is shocking. Her hands were shaking so hard the water pitcher rattled against the glass. She wasn't supposed to be listening. She was supposed to refill the table and move on. But the name that had just come out of the man's mouth in the back booth, low, casual, like a fact of weather, was the name of the man who'd split her lip that morning. The man in the booth stopped talking. He wasn't looking at his associate anymore. He was looking at her trembling hands, at the sleeves pulled past her wrists, at the bruise she thought her foundation had covered. It hadn't. Sable Oren was planted in that restaurant by the man who beats her, and the man in the back booth just realized she's hit that bell, because what he does next changes everything, and you don't want to miss it. Sable. Oren was 25 years old and living inside a life that had been assembled around her like a box. 7 months ago, her husband arranged a waitressing job for her at Marchetti's, an upscale Nashville restaurant where the steaks cost more than her weekly pay, and the private booze in the back were reserved for men who didn't use their real names on reservations. She'd thought it was a kindness, Ender helping her find work after he'd convinced her to leave her teaching position at a community music school. She didn't understand then what she understood now, that every kind thing Ender Tyrell did was a door disguised as a gift, and every door led deeper into a room she couldn't leave. Ender was 41, a Nashville entertainment lawyer with a client list that read like a country music awards ballot. 14 artists, record deals, publishing contracts. He sat on the board of the Tennessee Arts Council. He'd been profiled in Nashville's scene twice, once under the headline, "The Man Behind Music City's Next Generation." He hosted fundraisers at their home in Germantown, a restored Victorian with original hardwood and a wine cellar, and a basement door that locked from the outside. Sable had spent 3 hours behind that door last Tuesday because she'd forgotten to pick up his dry cleaning. Ender didn't use his fists often. He preferred control. Her phone, her clothing, her schedule, her voice. He decided when she spoke and to whom. He monitored her location. He read her messages. He'd isolated her so completely that the only person she interacted with outside the house was the hostess at Marchetti's, and even that was by his design. When Ender did hit her, it was precise, calculated, never where a short sleeve would show it, never before an event with cameras. Except this morning. This morning something had cracked in his usual precision. A coffee mug left on the counter. That was the trigger. His hand connected with her jaw before she saw it coming. The bruise bloomed fast, deep purple by noon. She layered foundation over it 3 times before her shift. It wasn't enough. What Sable didn't fully understand was why Ender had placed her at Marchetti's. He told her the restaurant attracted influential people, that keeping her ears open would help him identify potential clients. Lawyers need connections, he'd said. It sounded reasonable. So every night after her shift, Sable recited what she'd seen and heard, who sat with whom, what names came up, what fragments of conversation drifted past her while she poured water and cleared plates. She reported it like homework. Ender listened like a man receiving intelligence, because that's exactly what it was. That night, the back booth at Marchetti's was occupied by 2 men. One was built like a wall and carried himself with the blunt efficiency of someone who solved problems that couldn't be discussed publicly. That was Doss. The other sat across from him with the stillness of deep water. No unnecessary movement, no wasted energy. A presence that made the air around him heavier without him saying a word. That was Leith Arano. Leith was 36. He ran Nashville's underground the way a conductor runs an orchestra, with precision, patience, and an understanding that the loudest instrument in the room is usually the least important. He didn't threaten. He didn't perform. His silence was the performance, and it carried more consequence than most men's violence. He was discussing a problem. A Nashville entertainment lawyer had been building a money laundering pipeline through the city's music industry, washing dirty revenue through legitimate artist contracts. Leith's people had been tracking the operation for months. The lawyer's name was Ender Tyrell. That's when Sable's hands stopped working. The name hit her like a fist she didn't see coming, which was fitting because that's exactly how Ender operated. She stood frozen beside the adjacent table, pitcher trembling, water pooling on the white tablecloth, every nerve in her body firing at once. The man she'd been spying for was the man these men were hunting. The information she'd been feeding Ender wasn't about potential clients. It was about the men in this booth. She was a weapon pointed at the most dangerous man in Nashville, and she hadn't even known she was loaded. Leith stopped talking. His eyes moved from Doss to the waitress standing 4 feet away. He didn't look at her the way men in his position usually look at problems, with calculation, irritation, threat assessment. He looked at her hands first, the trembling, then her sleeves pulled past her wrists despite the restaurant running warm, then her jaw, where 3 layers of foundation failed to hide what had been done to her that morning. He'd seen this before. His mother carried the same invisible uniform for 11 years. Long sleeves in summer, foundation over bruises. The flinch that comes half a second before a man's hand moves because the body has learned to predict what the mind refuses to accept. His mother tried to run once. She made it 2 blocks. His father dragged her back by her hair. She never tried again. Leith was 9. He watched from the porch. He couldn't move. He stood up slowly. Sable stepped back, automatic, reflexive, the retreat of a woman whose body had been trained to create distance when a man rises near her. Leith stopped. He didn't come closer. He picked up a napkin from the table and held it out. Sable looked down. Blood was running from her finger where the pitcher's edge had sliced the skin. She hadn't felt it. Pain had become background noise in her life, something that was always there, like weather. "You're bleeding," Leith said. Not a command. An observation wrapped in something that felt dangerously close to care. Sable took the napkin. Their fingers brushed. His hand was warm and steady. Hers was ice. She wrapped the cloth around her finger and looked up at him. He held her gaze. 2 seconds, maybe 3. Without pressure, without demand. It was the longest anyone had looked at her like a person and not a possession in 3 years. After closing, Sable walked to the back exit where Ender's car always waited. A different sedan sat in its place. Leith leaned against it, hands in his pockets. "Your husband sent a car. I sent it away." Her breath caught. "Why?" "Because the man you're going home to is the man I'm going to dismantle. And I'd rather you weren't in the building when it happens." Sable stood in the alley, the restaurant behind her, Ender's world behind that. In front of her, a stranger, an open car door, and the terrifying possibility that the ground might actually hold if she stepped onto it. She got in. The loft above the music shop on Gallatin Avenue smelled like old vinyl and cedar. Sable stood in the middle of the room and did what she always did in a new space. Counted the exits. Front door, fire escape window, back staircase. 3 ways out. More than she'd had in 3 years. Doss swept the perimeter and left without a word. Sable was alone. She walked to the bedroom. The door had a lock on the inside. Only the inside. She turned the bolt, opened the door, turned the bolt again, left it open. Her hand stayed on the knob for a long time. The lock was hers. The choice was hers. She left the door open and sat on the edge of the bed with her arms wrapped around herself, listening to the muffled sound of a guitar being tuned in the shop below. It was the first music she'd heard in months that wasn't controlled by Ender. It sounded like breathing. Leith arrived the next morning. He sat across from her at a small kitchen table, a folder between them. No pleasantries, no easing in. He opened it. "I know you've been reporting to your husband," he said. "I've known since your 2nd month at Marchetti's." Sable's blood went cold. Her hands gripped the edge of the table. She braced, shoulders drawing in, chin dropping, the automatic posture of a woman preparing to be struck. Leith didn't move. "I'm not angry at you," he said. "You didn't know what you were carrying." But what she'd been carrying had weight. Leith turned the folder toward her. A timeline. On the left side, dates and details. Fragments of conversations Sable had overheard at Marchetti's and reported to Ender. A man's name, his schedule, his habit of walking to his car alone after Thursday meetings. On the right side, a single event. 3 months ago. A man named Harlan Moss, a port logistics manager who coordinated shipments for Leith's operation, was killed in what police ruled a robbery gone wrong. It wasn't a robbery. It was an execution. And the intelligence that made it possible, the schedule, the habits, the window of vulnerability, had come from Sable's mouth. She didn't make it to the bathroom. She vomited in the kitchen sink, her body rejecting the information before her mind could process it. When she straightened up, her face was gray, and her hands were shaking so hard she couldn't grip the counter. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I know," Leith said. "That's why you're sitting here." The guilt was a physical thing. It settled into her bones like concrete. She could feel it reshaping her posture, pulling her inward, making her smaller. A man was dead because she'd said words out loud without understanding they were ammunition. Ender had loaded her like a weapon, aimed her at a target, and pulled the trigger using her voice. But underneath the guilt, something else was moving. Something hot and unfamiliar. Anger. Not at herself. At the man who'd put those words in her mouth and blood on her hands without telling her what she was holding. The days that followed were quiet. Leith gave her space, but didn't disappear. He left a blanket on the couch each evening. She ran cold, and he'd noticed without being told. He sat across the room in the evenings, reading, never crowding. One night she came into the kitchen at 2 a.m., unable to sleep. He was there with a book and cold coffee. She sat across from him. He made her tea without asking. She wrapped her hands around the mug, and the warmth reached something inside her that had been frozen so long she'd forgotten it could thaw. She caught herself watching him read, the way his eyes moved across the page with patience, the way his jaw held tension even at rest, like a man who never fully stood down. She looked away. He noticed. Neither spoke. Sunday morning. Sable stood at the kitchen sink washing dishes. A plate, a glass, another plate. The plate was already clean, but she kept scrubbing, rhythmic, mechanical, her knuckles going raw against the sponge. She didn't realize she was crying. The tears just fell, mixing with the soapy water, silent. Ender punished her if a single dish was left in the sink. The habit lived in her muscles deeper than memory. Even here, even safe, her body was still performing obedience for a man who wasn't in the room. Leith walked into the kitchen. He didn't tell her to stop. He didn't tell her it was okay. He reached past her and gently took the plate from her hands, set it on the rack, picked up a towel and dried her hands, carefully, slowly, the way you'd handle something that had been gripped too tight for too long. "The dishes can wait," he said. "You don't live there anymore." 5 words. Sable stood at the sink with her hands empty and dry, and something that had been locked inside her since the first night Ender hit her cracked open half an inch. 2 days later, Ender appeared on television, a Nashville music industry panel at the Parthenon. He was speaking passionately about artist advocacy, the importance of protecting creative talent from exploitation. The moderator praised his commitment. The audience applauded. The chyron read, "Ender Tyrell, champion of Nashville artists." Sable watched from the loft couch. Something crystallized. Not broke. Crystallized. The man on that screen laundered money through the music of artists he claimed to protect. He used his own wife as an unwitting spy, and an innocent man was dead because of it. He wasn't an advocate. He was a parasite dressed in purpose. She wasn't the broken one. He was. She went back to the documents Leith had given her. Deeper this time. Ender's laundering operation didn't just use shell companies. It ran through his own clients' contracts. 14 country music artists, all legitimate, all successful, had fraudulent royalty streams embedded in their deals. Fake co-writing credits, phantom producers, fabricated licensing agreements. all routing dirty money through Nashville's music infrastructure into offshore accounts. The artist had no idea their catalogs were being used as washing machines. But one artist had noticed. Blythe Calloway, 23, a singer-songwriter who caught discrepancies in her royalty statements and started asking questions. Ender's response was surgical, a manufactured breach of contract dispute that stripped Blythe of her record deal, her publishing rights, and her reputation. She'd been blacklisted across Nashville. Her career was ash at 23 because she saw a number that didn't add up and refused to look away. Sable closed the folder. She walked into the room where Leith was reviewing port surveillance and set the documents on his desk. "He destroys everyone," she said. Her voice was low and shaking at the edges. "He takes people and he uses them until they're empty, and then he throws them away. He did it to me. He did it to Blythe. He did it to Harlan, and Harlan is dead." Everything she'd held inside broke open. Every locked basement door, every monitored phone call, every morning spent reading Ender's mood before her own pulse. It poured out in words that were raw and honest and overdue. Leith didn't move. He listened. When she finished, he said, "Good. You have a voice. Use it." Sable wiped her face, her jaw set. "I don't want him dead. Dead means the music stops and nobody hears what he did. I want every person who shook his hand to see what he is. And I want Harlan's name spoken in a room full of people who pretend men like him don't exist." The Nashville Songwriters Tribute Gala, 3 weeks out. Annual black tie event at the Ryman Auditorium honoring the city's music industry. Ender Tyrell was receiving the Music City Legal Excellence Award. The tribute playlist included songs by Blythe Calloway, music she'd lost the rights to because of a dispute Ender manufactured to silence her. The governor, 400 guests, full press, live streamed. Sable intended to give every camera in that room something worth recording. Leith's tech specialist, Corbin, lean, focused, the kind of man who could dismantle a security system while holding a conversation about lunch, held an events management contract with the Ryman through one of Leith's legitimate fronts. He'd access the AV system 2 hours before curtain. 4 seconds to switch the feed. Sable built the evidence package. Ender's client contracts with the fraudulent royalty streams highlighted. Offshore account maps, the laundering structure laid bare. Harlan's murder timeline matched against Sable's forced intelligence reports, the dates lining up like a lock and key. Blythe's fabricated breach of contract beside internal emails from Ender's firm proving the dispute was manufactured. Audio of Ender threatening Sable, captured by Leith's team from a device planted in the Germantown house. Then the last piece surfaced. Documents from Ender's home safe, cracked by Leith's people during a conference trip to Atlanta. A life insurance policy. On Sable. $4 million. Beneficiary, a trust Ender controlled. Taken out 14 months ago. Sable cross-referenced the timeline and watched the pattern emerge. The beatings had been escalating, not randomly, on a schedule. Each incident generating a hospital visit documented as an accident. A medical paper trail constructed visit by visit. Clumsy wife, anxiety issues, history of falls. The policy matured in 2 months. She stared at the document and felt the mathematics of her own planned death assemble with nauseating clarity. The bruises weren't rage. They were calibration. Each one measured to build a record that would make her eventual death look like the tragic but unsurprising end of a fragile woman. She wasn't his wife. She was a payout on a countdown. She added the policy to the evidence package. Her hands didn't shake. Leith's people found Blythe Calloway in a studio apartment in East Nashville. Broke, blacklisted. Writing songs on a second-hand guitar she couldn't release because Ender's firm still controlled her publishing. Sable visited alone. She sat across from Blythe on a futon that doubled as a bed and told her everything. The laundering, the royalty fraud, the fabricated dispute, Harlan's death. Blythe listened with the stillness of a woman who'd always sensed the shape of the thing that destroyed her, but couldn't name it until now. When Sable finished, Blythe said, "I want to sing at that gala, my songs, my name, while they watch him fall." That's exactly what's going to happen. Ender wasn't idle. He'd filed a missing persons report. The devoted husband weeping for cameras. Reward offered. His connections in Nashville law enforcement squeezed Leith's territory. A raid on a Gallatin Avenue property forced them to relocate Sable to a secondary safe house. Every day she stayed hidden was a day Ender's public sympathy grew thicker. The night before the gala, Sable and Leith sat on the fire escape of the secondary location. Nashville pulsed below, neon, bass, distant laughter drifting up from Broadway like music heard through water. Harlan died because of words I said without knowing what they meant, Sable said quietly. I carry that. Leith was quiet for a while. Then he spoke. My mother tried to leave once. I was 9. She made it 2 blocks before my father caught her in the street, dragged her back by her hair. Neighbors watched. Nobody moved. His jaw tightened. She never tried again. I stood on the porch and I couldn't do anything. Couldn't move. Couldn't speak. He paused. I built everything I have so I'd never stand on a porch again and have nothing to offer. His hand found hers. She held on. They sat above the city until the neon dimmed and the sky turned gray. Morning of the gala. Sable dressed in silence. The gown was deep crimson, not decoration. Armor. Corbin wired the earpiece. Blythe was already backstage at the Ryman, guitar in hand. Sable walked downstairs. Leith was waiting. Dark suit, no tie. When he saw her, he went still. He didn't compliment her. He looked at her like she was about to set something on fire, and he wanted a front row seat. She almost smiled. The Ryman Auditorium. Stained glass, wooden pews, 400 guests in black tie filling a room that was built for truth, and tonight would finally hear some. Sable entered on Leith's arm. Whispers spread like flame on dry grass. People recognized him. People recognized her, the missing wife from every newscast. She was supposed to be fragile, hiding. Instead, she walked through the Ryman like the wood beneath her feet had always known her name. Ender saw her from across the lobby. His champagne stopped midair. He crossed toward her, mask locked on. Sable, sweetheart, thank God you're... Leith shifted his weight. One movement. Ender's sentence died in his throat. Sable looked him in the eye. You put me in that restaurant to spy for you. A man is dead because of it. Tonight every person in this room finds out who really killed him. The lights dimmed. Ender took the stage for his award. Mid-speech, the screens flanking the stage flickered, went dark, came back with new content. Contracts, offshore accounts, Harlan's photograph beside the murder timeline, Blythe's fabricated dispute, the life insurance policy, hospital records beside browser searches documenting how to make a death look accidental. Then the music started, not a recording. Blythe Calloway walked onto the Ryman stage with her guitar and began to sing Paper Walls. The song Ender stole, the song he laundered money through, the song he destroyed her career to silence. Live. Raw. Her voice filling a room built for hymns with something more honest than any hymn that had ever echoed off those walls. Ender stood on stage with his award in his hand and his empire burning on the screens behind him. And every camera in the Ryman was already rolling. Blythe's voice carried through the Ryman like something that had been held underwater and finally broke the surface. Paper Walls, written in a studio apartment after she'd lost everything, sung now on the stage where the man who took it stood watching his own destruction scroll behind her in letters large enough to read from the balcony. The screens told the rest. Ender's client contracts with fraudulent royalty streams highlighted in red. Fake co-writing credits, phantom producers, fabricated licensing deals routing dirty money through 14 artists' catalogs. Offshore account maps tracing every dollar from Nashville studios to shell companies in 3 countries. The laundering pipeline laid bare in clean, undeniable lines that even the most loyal donor in the room couldn't rationalize away. Harlan Moss. His employee photograph beside the timeline. On the left, Sable's forced intelligence reports. Dates, details, fragments she'd repeated to Ender without understanding their weight. On the right, the ambush. The dates matched perfectly. A man killed because a woman said his name out loud in a restaurant, not knowing she was handing her husband a trigger. Blythe's fabricated breach of contract beside internal emails from Ender's own firm proving the dispute was manufactured. A 23-year-old woman's career destroyed in 3 emails and a phone call because she noticed a number that didn't add up. The life insurance policy on Sable. $4 million. The trust Ender controlled. 14 months of escalating violence documented in hospital records displayed beside his browser history. Searches for survivability thresholds, accidental death statistics, investigation timelines. The mathematics of a murder that hadn't happened yet, mapped out in the handwriting of a man who calculated everything. The audio played last. Ender's voice through every speaker in the Ryman, clear as a church bell and twice as damning. You report what I tell you to report. You smile when I tell you to smile. And if you ever think about walking out that door, I will make sure no one believes a word that comes out of your mouth. 400 people heard it while Blythe sang underneath it, her voice weaving through his threats like light through a cracked wall. The room came apart. Donors set down glasses. Artists in the audience, some of them Ender's own clients, stared at the screens and saw their names woven into contracts they'd never fully understood. A woman in the 4th row stood up and walked out, then another, then 6 more. The governor's security detail moved toward the exits. Reporters on the mezzanines scrambled for cameras that were already recording. Ender tried the mask. He turned toward the nearest camera with the automatic precision of a man who had talked himself out of every corner he'd ever known. His mouth opened around the first syllable of a denial. Blythe's voice drowned it. She didn't sing louder. She didn't need to. The truth has its own volume, and it was filling every corner of the Ryman while Ender stood on stage trying to outperform a woman who had nothing left to lose and everything to say. His allies disappeared. Board members, fellow attorneys, industry executives. They didn't walk. They retreated, the way people move from something structurally unsound. Every handshake Ender had ever leveraged evaporated in the time it took Blythe to finish the second chorus. FBI agents entered through the Ryman's side doors. They'd received an anonymous evidence package that morning. 4 agents, calm, unhurried. The kind of patience that belongs to men who already know the ending. Ender saw them and the performance collapsed. His shoulders folded inward, his mouth closed. He looked across the auditorium at Sable, standing in the aisle, untouched, Blythe's voice surrounding her like armor, and the man who had controlled every room he'd ever entered couldn't control this one. They cuffed him on the stage of the Ryman Auditorium, past the podium, past his own award plaque, past 400 witnesses and every camera that had come to honor him. The flashbulbs didn't stop. Blythe finished the song. The last note hung in the Ryman's rafters like smoke refusing to clear. Then silence. Then applause. Not for the gala, not for the ceremony, but for a woman who'd just sung the truth in a room full of people finally willing to hear it. Sable stood in the center of it all. She didn't speak. She breathed. Deep, full, unrestricted. The first breath in 3 years that didn't belong to someone else. 6 months later, a converted storefront on Gallatin Avenue with a sign above the door in steady black letters. The Harlan Center for Whistleblower Protection. Free legal aid for people coerced into criminal activity against their will. People used as tools, as shields, as fall guys by men who never face what they've done. Harlan Moss's photograph hung in the entrance hallway. Every person who walked through the door saw his face first. Sable made sure of that. She ran it. She sat across from people who carried guilt that wasn't theirs and helped them find the legal footing to separate what they'd done from what had been done to them. She carried Harlan's name in everything she built because carrying it was the least she owed and the most she could give. Blythe's publishing rights were restored through the courts. She released Paper Walls independently, and it charted in 2 weeks. She performed at the Harlan Center's opening night, her own music, her own name, a room full of people who came because they'd heard the story and wanted to stand where it turned around. Ender Tyrell was sentenced to 26 years, money laundering, fraud, accessory to murder, domestic battery, conspiracy. 14 artists filed civil suits. The Tennessee Arts Council scrubbed his name from every record. Leith walked into the center on a quiet afternoon. The tension that had lived in his frame was softer. He'd restructured, stepped back, investing in legitimate businesses along Gallatin Avenue. He found Sable in the kitchen. She turned to him. That Sunday morning in the safe house, I was at the sink scrubbing a plate that was already clean. I didn't even know I was crying. She paused. You walked in. You didn't tell me to stop. You didn't tell me it was fine. You took the plate out of my hands and dried them with a towel, and you said, "The dishes can wait. You don't live there anymore." Her eyes were bright. Every man I've known either ignored what was broken in me or tried to fix it on his timeline. You just took the plate and told me the truth. That's when I knew. Leith stepped forward. Sable closed the distance. The kiss was hers, her choice, her moment. Not because he saved her, because he showed her she could save herself. Because he took a plate from her hands and gave her permission to stop performing survival in a place where survival was no longer required. A federal holding cell. Ender Tyrell on a thin mattress, plexiglass TV, the anchor's voice steady and bright. The Harlan Center for Whistleblower Protection celebrated its first anniversary today with a live performance by Blythe Calloway. Founder Sable Oren dedicated the evening to Harlan Moss, whose death she says will never be forgotten. Ender stared at the screen. His hand found the remote. He pressed the button. Darkness. Silence. The kind that doesn't pass. He sat in it, and he lived with it. If this story shook something, and tell us what you'd name your center. Share this with someone who needs to hear that being used doesn't make you guilty. Ring that bell and be here when the next one drops.